The folder was thicker than the others, its edges browned with age, tied shut with a brittle ribbon that cracked when touched. Dr. Horace Linton stared at the label, faintly inked in a quivering hand. Wexler, Annabeth and Eleanor. Case 39B, 1853. The air in the archive felt heavier suddenly, as if even the walls leaned closer, curious. He shouldn't have opened it. It was forbidden, sealed by court order, buried beneath decades of silence and professional denial. But curiosity, especially in the mind of a man who'd seen too much, was louder than caution. Inside, the first page was a scrawled note from a nurse long dead. Same words, same wounds, same final hour. Below it, the date, October 13th, 1853, and nothing else. They were born in 1841, identical twins, so the file said. Brought to the asylum at age 12, Linton flipped to the second sheet, an old photograph clipped to a yellowing intake form. The girls were seated in matching dresses, their hair parted the same way, gazes vacant except on closer inspection. Eleanor had her hand over Annabeth's. And Annabeth had bruises shaped like fingertips across her collarbone. "Have you ever seen patients who bled the same?" The voice of his old mentor echoed in Linton's mind. "I mean, exactly the same. Same spot, same hour, no contact." Linton had laughed at the time. Now he wasn't so sure. A third page far down the stack bore a single line, handwritten in graphite so faint it was nearly gone. The mirror cracked, but the face remained whole. That's when the lights flickered. "Electrical short," he muttered, though no one was around to hear him. The archive was in the oldest wing of the hospital, barely used, mostly forgotten. He set the file aside and reached for the dusty recorder he'd brought with him, clicking it on. Dr. Horace Linton, personal log, July 3rd, 1960. I have come across an anomalous file detailing the psychiatric case of Annabeth and Eleanor Wexler. Early documentation suggests unusual phenomena, shared symptoms, coordinated behavior beyond ordinary mimicry, possibly induced delusions, or... He paused. No, not possibly. Something else. He flipped again. A diagram appeared, hand-drawn. It was circular, with strange markings along its edge. At the center, two silhouettes, identical back to back. Beneath it, a caption: "Twinning is not duplication, it is division of essence." Something about the image disturbed him more than it should have. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. His fingers brushed the page again, then froze. The paper was warm, like skin. He jerked his hand away. Behind him, the room whispered. He turned quickly. No one, just rows of rusted filing cabinets and the smell of mildew. Still, the whispering grew, rising from somewhere deeper, beneath the floor, in the walls. A female voice, overlapping itself, soft and pleading. "Find the hour. Stop the hour." "The hour is not the end." Linton slammed the folder shut. The whispers ceased instantly. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in trauma, in psychosis, in the fragile boundaries of the human mind. And yet, there was something about the Wexler file that felt wrong. Not fabricated, not exaggerated, but buried, as if too many people had tried too hard to forget it. He placed the file into his satchel and left the archive in silence. Outside, the sun had vanished behind thick clouds. A chill passed through him. In the distance, the bell tower struck 3 times, though his watch read 2:47. He didn't go home that night. He returned to his office, poured himself a drink, and began reading the file in full. Whatever happened to the Wexler twins in 1853, it hadn't ended there. And now that the file was open again, it had already begun. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling true stories lost in time. The carriage wheels cracked over gravel as the Ashwood estate loomed into view, grey stone and ivy, like a mausoleum built for the living. Annabeth pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Beside her, Eleanor sat silent, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the iron gates ahead. Neither spoke. They hadn't since their parents' funeral. The driver didn't wait. He tossed the trunk near the front steps and flicked the reins. The horses seemed eager to leave. Marjorie Wexler, tall and severe in black wool, opened the door before they could knock. Her eyes were like knives, sharp, narrow, unblinking. She didn't smile. "You'll address me as grandmother. No running, no yelling, no foolishness," she said, voice flat as stone. "This is a house of order, not grief." Annabeth nodded. Eleanor didn't move. Ashwood was colder inside than the early spring outside. The walls were lined with portraits, all stern men and pale women, their expressions echoing Marjorie's. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and long-dead flowers. Clocks ticked from every room, none of them in sync. They were led to a room on the 3rd floor. Twin beds, white linen, a wardrobe tall enough to fit both girls inside. Marjorie said nothing more before closing the door behind her. Annabeth sat carefully on the bed nearest the window. "It's big," she whispered. Eleanor looked around, frowning. "It's wrong," she said. At night, the silence was strange, not complete. The wind moaned through cracks in the walls, and something tapped, regularly, lightly, from behind the headboards. Annabeth couldn't sleep. Neither could Eleanor. A week passed. Marjorie's routines were exact. Breakfast at 6, chores, silence during reading hours, dinner at 5, prayer at 6, no questions, no deviation. On the 8th day, Eleanor began talking in her sleep, Latin mostly, phrases Annabeth couldn't understand, but somehow felt familiar. And then bruises, thin purple marks on Eleanor's arms as if gripped tightly in the night. Annabeth woke up with identical bruises on her own arms the next morning. She didn't tell Marjorie. She only told Eleanor, who said, "They don't like when we talk." "Who?" Annabeth asked. Eleanor didn't answer. By the 2nd week, clocks began to ring at odd hours. Not all of them, just a few. One would strike 13 chimes at midnight. Another would tick backwards. They tried to tell Marjorie. She dismissed them. "The clocks are older than you. They don't take kindly to nonsense." It rained for 3 days straight. On the 4th, Eleanor stood still in the hallway, staring at a painting. It depicted a woman holding 2 infants, both pale, both silent. Her dress was torn. Her eyes looked exactly like Eleanor's. "She drowned them," Eleanor said. Annabeth felt ice run down her spine. "What?" "She had to. They wouldn't stop." Later that night, Annabeth woke to find Eleanor standing at the wardrobe, hands pressed against its doors, whispering. When Annabeth called her name, Eleanor turned slowly. "She's behind it," she said. "She wants out." Annabeth got up and touched her sister's face. Her skin was ice-cold. "I dreamed we fell into the lake," Eleanor murmured. "We couldn't scream, but we still bled. In the morning, both girls had scratches down their backs, identical, fresh, no explanation." Annabeth began sketching things in her journal she didn't remember drawing, circles, eyes, strange runes. Eleanor began writing in Latin, though she'd never been taught. At dinner, Marjorie looked at their hands and paled. "You've opened something," she said, rising from the table. "You've no right to reach beyond the veil." Neither girl understood what she meant. That night, the clocks all stopped at 3:03, and outside, under the moon, something moved in the trees. Tall, thin, gliding between the pines. Humming a lullaby neither girl remembered learning, but both knew by heart. At first it sounded like mice, quick scratching movements behind the walls at night. But mice don't whisper, and they certainly don't call you by name. Annabeth awoke to Eleanor sitting up in bed, head cocked, eyes half-lidded. Her lips barely moved, but a voice threaded through the silence, soft, layered, distant. "Come see. Come play. Come back." "Eleanor," Annabeth whispered, reaching over. "Who are you talking to?" Her sister didn't blink. "They're lonely." By morning, neither could remember much, but Annabeth noticed dirt beneath Eleanor's fingernails. Later, she found faint, muddy footprints trailing from the wardrobe to the hallway, too small to be Marjorie's, too thin to be theirs. The trail stopped at a wall covered in faded floral paper. Behind it, the tapping returned, but slower now, more like fingers. Annabeth pressed her ear to the wall, whispering. Laughter. Then, suddenly, her own name. She stumbled back. Eleanor didn't react. In the days that followed, Eleanor began responding to voices no one else heard. She would pause mid-sentence, nod at empty space, then continue speaking as if nothing had happened. Her appetite waned. She grew pale. Her eyes took on a faraway glaze, like she was dreaming even while awake. Annabeth tried to talk to Marjorie, but the woman snapped, "Don't you bring their names into this house." "Whose names?" Annabeth demanded. Marjorie's eyes narrowed. They were sealed. Leave them sealed. That night, Eleanor crawled into Annabeth's bed. "There's another hallway behind the hallway," she whispered. "It only shows when the lights go out." Annabeth didn't sleep. 2 days later, while dusting the shelves in the sitting room, Annabeth found a small, leather-bound book wedged behind a row of hymnals. It was a journal, old and water-damaged. On the inside cover, written in curling ink, Agnatha Wexler, 1712. She flipped through it slowly. Most of the entries were ordinary, harvest dates, weather complaints, but halfway through the tone shifted. The twins scream in unison, the mirror pulses. "I have drawn the symbol again. It appears in my sleep." Another entry. "They say the same words. They do not learn them. The house wants them. I fear I was only the door." And then, near the end, "The children in the walls are not buried. They whisper from under the floor." Annabeth's hands trembled as she closed the book. She didn't show it to Eleanor. Not yet. That evening they heard a knock, not at the door, but from inside the chimney. Eleanor rose from her chair without hesitation and placed her hand against the cold bricks. "It's where she hid them," she said, "with the others." Annabeth shook her head. "Who?" "What others?" Eleanor turned, eyes wide. "The girls who came before." At dinner, Marjorie didn't speak. She simply stared at Eleanor, her fork untouched, her knuckles white around her rosary. After clearing the plates, Marjorie ordered the girls to bed early. She locked their door from the outside, but the whispering didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder. This time, Annabeth heard it too. They both sat upright, breath shallow. "They're calling," Eleanor said, voice shaky. "For us?" "No, for her." The next morning, a priest arrived. His name was Father Barrow, and he carried with him a worn Bible and eyes full of doubt. Marjorie met him at the door. "You said you'd never call me again," he said coldly. "I didn't," she replied. He glanced at the house, then at the twins watching from the stairs. "Something's awake again," he muttered. "Something we buried deep." He stayed only a few hours. When he left, he looked pale, shaken. His hands trembled as he crossed himself. He never returned. 3 nights later, Marjorie stood at the window watching the woods. "Barrow is gone," she said aloud. "That thing is stirring." She turned to the empty room behind her. "God help the girls." It began with the sound of the library door creaking open in the middle of the night. Annabeth had woken to find Eleanor already gone, her bed empty and cold. The hallway was darker than usual, as if the moon had turned its face away. The house didn't groan or sigh. It listened. Annabeth followed the faint trail of footprints down the stairs, barefoot and shaking. The main parlor was empty. The clock had stopped at 3:03 again. The library door stood ajar. Inside, Eleanor knelt before the fireplace, one hand pressed against the stones, her face pale and eyes unfocused. "It's here," she whispered. Behind the lion's head. The lion's head was a stone carving above the hearth, weathered, dust-caked and loose. With a tremble, Annabeth pushed it aside. Beneath, hidden in shadow, was a keyhole. They hadn't seen a key, but Eleanor reached into her pocket and produced an old iron key without hesitation. "Where did you—" "It was in my shoe," she answered, as if that made perfect sense. The wall groaned, then shifted. A thin vertical crack spread along the far shelf. Books tumbled as stone scraped against stone. A door revealed itself. Beyond it, stairs descended into darkness. No lantern, no matches. Yet somehow, they saw. The air thickened as they moved downward, each step colder than the last. Finally, the stairs opened into a narrow, vaulted chamber, lined with carved brick, damp and trembling. At the center of the room stood a circle of ash. Within it, a raised slab of marble etched with deep grooves, each line forming symbols they couldn't name but instinctively feared. Around the circle were wax stubs and scattered bones, small, bird-like, feathers stuck to the floor. On the walls, handprints, hundreds of them, coated in what looked like soot but smelled like iron. Eleanor stepped into the circle. "No," Annabeth whispered, but Eleanor raised her arms and spoke a word she had never learned. The room exhaled. From the ceiling, a thin whisper drifted down, not from a single voice but dozens, overlapping. Words neither girl could understand but felt deep in their ribs. Annabeth stumbled back. Her shoulder struck the wall. One of the handprints pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Eleanor dropped to her knees. Blood dripped from her nose. Annabeth rushed forward, pulling her from the slab. "Stop it! Stop whatever this is!" But Eleanor blinked slowly. "We've always been here," she murmured. "We just forgot." The chamber shook. A low moan echoed through the stone. They ran, back through the door, up the stairs, into the library. The stone wall closed behind them as soon as they crossed the threshold. The key burned hot in Eleanor's palm, then turned to ash. They didn't speak that night, they couldn't. In the morning, Marjorie entered the library and found them curled together in a corner, pale, trembling, speechless. She said nothing at first. Then she walked straight to the fireplace and touched the lion's head. "You've opened it," she said. Annabeth looked up. "You knew?" "I sealed it 30 years ago," Marjorie replied. "Your mother broke the seal when she was your age." "And her mother before her," Eleanor whispered. "It called to us." Marjorie turned slowly. "It calls to all Wexler twins. That doesn't mean you answer." She dragged them both to the parlor and scrubbed their hands raw with holy water and salt. She muttered prayers between each rub, eyes frantic, voice cracking. "You don't know what you've done," she hissed. "It sees you now." That night, Eleanor dreamed of a girl with no face standing at the foot of her bed. The girl said nothing, just pointed down. Annabeth woke screaming. Their backs bled from fresh scratches, 12 each, running in perfect symmetry, as if something had tried to carve them open, from the inside out. Spring bled slowly into summer, though Ashwood never seemed to notice. The fog thickened, the trees leaned in and the ground remained too wet, too soft, like it remembered being something else. Eleanor began to sleepwalk more frequently. She spoke less, ate little, and seemed always to be listening to something Annabeth could not hear. One afternoon, Marjorie sent them to gather wild herbs near the lake that curved like a sickle just beyond the orchard. The water was dark, cold even in July, bordered by reeds that rustled without wind. Annabeth hated it. She'd always hated it. But Eleanor walked toward the edge as if drawn. "Stay back," Annabeth warned. Eleanor didn't stop. Annabeth turned for a moment, kneeling to cut a sprig of rosemary. When she looked up again, Eleanor was gone. Her heart thudded in her chest as she dropped the basket and ran. At the shore, she spotted a ripple breaking the still surface, then a pale hand. Without thinking, she plunged in. The water gripped her like ice. Her limbs moved sluggishly, every stroke an effort. She reached Eleanor, who floated limply, eyes closed, lips blue. Annabeth dragged her to shore, coughing, shaking, gasping. They collapsed together in the reeds. That was when Annabeth saw it. On Eleanor's stomach, etched into the skin like a fresh burn, was a circle. The same one from the chamber, perfectly symmetrical, and then her own stomach seared. She lifted her dress, trembling. The mark was there too. They didn't speak of it. Not to Marjorie, not to each other. But that night Eleanor began to hum. The tune was familiar, a lullaby. Annabeth hadn't heard it in years. Not since they were babies, not since their mother, before the accident, before the fire. But Eleanor swore she hadn't been humming. The next day they were taken to town for a routine doctor's visit. Marjorie had insisted, perhaps to prove nothing was wrong. The doctor examined them separately, muttering about sleep deprivation, malnutrition, stress. But when he checked their abdomens, he grew silent. "These burns," he said, frowning. "They're too uniform, too exact." "Must be a coincidence," Marjorie snapped. "Twins don't blister in sync," the doctor murmured. Back at Ashwood, Marjorie lit every candle in the house. She fasted. She scrubbed the floors with vinegar and ash, chanting between sobs. She locked the girls in their room that night. Around midnight, the door clicked open by itself. Eleanor sat up. "They're ready to speak." Annabeth didn't move. "Who is?" Eleanor pointed at the wardrobe. Annabeth shook her head. "We're not doing this again." But Eleanor was already at the door. They crept downstairs. The house was too quiet, the clocks no longer ticked, even the wind had stilled. At the base of the stairs stood a woman. She wore white, soaked through, hair dripping across her face. Her feet were bare. Her fingers curled inward like claws. Neither girl screamed. The woman raised one hand and pointed toward the east wing. They followed. She led them to a parlor long unused, its windows covered in thick velvet drapes. At the center stood a table. Upon it, an object wrapped in linen. Eleanor unwrapped it slowly. A mirror, but not any mirror. It was cracked across the center, its frame rusted, the glass stained like old blood. Yet when they looked inside, their reflections didn't move. Instead, they stared, mouths open, miming silent screams. Eleanor touched the glass. So did Annabeth. Pain lanced through both their chests. They fell backward in unison, clutching at their hearts. The mirror remained unchanged. Later in their room, Annabeth wept. "We're cursed," she whispered. "We're not right." Eleanor stared out the window. "They want us to remember." Annabeth shivered. "Remember what?" Eleanor's voice was barely audible. "The last time we died." Autumn in New Hampshire arrived sharp and bitter in 1918, dragging the scent of wet leaves and distant gunpowder. Nathaniel Clark stepped off the train with a limp in his right leg, a cane in one hand and a leather satchel in the other. His uniform was worn, his eyes older than his years. The war had carved pieces from him, some physical, others far deeper. Ashwood hadn't changed much, still looming, still grey, still watching. He hadn't planned to return, but the telegram was clear. Marjorie Wexler, deceased. Estate in probate, immediate family summoned. He was family, albeit distantly. His mother had been Marjorie's niece, and the Wexler blood, thick with silence and secrets, still ran in him. The house was empty when he arrived, not just in occupancy, but in feeling, as though even memory had abandoned its rooms. The solicitor left a box marked private, for N. Clark only. Inside, keys, a faded photograph of two young girls, identical, unsmiling, and a bundle of letters tied with twine. The letters were addressed to Eleanor Wexler, all postmarked between 1872 and 1899. None had ever been sent. He read the first one that night. "I see you in the mirror sometimes, not your reflection but you, standing where I am, wearing my face, but not smiling. The house is too loud when no one speaks. I think it remembers better than we do." The signature was always the same, Annabeth. The writing deteriorated with each letter, words slanted, ink smeared. Some ended mid-sentence. One simply said, "She's underneath me." Nathaniel searched the house for clues. The basement was sealed, the east wing shuttered. But in the attic, behind trunks filled with rotted dresses and broken toys, he found a small chest. Inside, a collection of drawings, mostly circles, eyes, mirrors, a journal, and a letter from Marjorie. "I did what I had to do." The line had to be preserved, but not remembered. "If you are reading this, then the house has begun again. Burn what you find. Do not let them awaken." But Nathaniel didn't burn them. Instead, he returned to the family graveyard beyond the orchard, where stone angels wept beneath moss and vines. He found Marjorie's stone, simple, unmarked. Next to it, two matching headstones, cracked and worn. Annabeth Wexler, 1841. Eleanor Wexler, 1841. No death date, just question marks. No inscription, no epitaph. That night, he had his first dream. He stood at the center of a circle surrounded by children with stitched mouths. The twins hovered above the ground, faces serene, blood dripping from their eyes. They spoke in unison. "You are the last door." He woke in a cold sweat, throat raw from screaming. The next morning he began digging. It wasn't madness. It was instinct. At the edge of the graveyard stood a crooked tree older than the fence line. Beneath it, 6 inches down, he struck wood. A box. Inside, bones, small, fragile. Not animal, not one child. 3. He reburied them. He didn't tell the town. He couldn't explain what they'd say, that he'd dreamt the location, that he knew they were there before he touched the shovel. Instead, he returned to the house and opened every clock he could find. Hidden inside several were tiny scraps of parchment, Latin phrases, repeated symbols. Each parchment bore a date, and each was the same. October 13th. Across different years, different clocks, different hands. He searched the old study and found a book titled De Umbris Animarum, on the shadows of souls. Marjorie had underlined one passage. What is divided must yearn to return, but not all reunions bring healing. Nathaniel folded the page and stared out the window. The wind had picked up again, and from the woods beyond Ashwood, something watched him, tall, still, and familiar. Something that had his eyes. The storm arrived without warning. One moment the sky hung heavy with a dull grey silence. The next it split open with a cry of thunder that seemed to come from beneath the earth instead of above. Rain pounded Ashwood, like fists demanding entry, and for the first time in decades the house groaned audibly, as if waking from a long and troubled sleep. Marjorie Wexler was dying. Her final days were filled with muttering. She wandered the halls with a candle gripped in one hand and a rosary in the other, speaking to corners no one else could see. Nathaniel watched her from a distance, uncertain whether to intervene or let her descend alone into the dark that clearly awaited her. "She's talking to the dead," the housekeeper whispered. "No," Nathaniel replied. "She's warning them." Late one night, Marjorie called him to her room. Her face was drawn, her hands shaking. The candlelight made her skin appear almost translucent. On the bed beside her lay a single object, a rusted silver comb, its teeth blackened at the tips. "They come through mirrors first," she rasped, "but when that fails, they come through blood." Nathaniel didn't speak. She continued, "The twins, it wasn't the house, it was the blood. Wexler blood, we were the bridge, not the victims." He asked what happened to Eleanor and Annabeth. She laughed, bitter and broken. "They never left." Then she gripped his wrist with a force that defied her frailty. "You can't let them complete it," she hissed. "They must never become one. Not again. Not ever." He tried to ask what she meant, but she collapsed before he could. Her breath stilled as the thunder cracked again, rattling the windows. A second later, every clock in the house chimed once, simultaneously, though none were wound. At exactly 3:03, Nathaniel closed her eyes and covered her with the quilt she had embroidered in her youth, the initials AW and EW, stitched together at its center. In the hours that followed, the temperature in the house dropped. Mirrors fogged despite the absence of heat. The grandfather clock in the main hall ticked counterclockwise. Somewhere upstairs, a piano began to play 3 notes over and over. Nathaniel walked through the halls following the sound. He passed by the locked library, the unused parlor, the sealed door beneath the stairs. Each time he did, his cane felt heavier. His limp worsened. The weight wasn't just in his leg. It was in the house now. When he reached Marjorie's bedroom to check her body again, he froze. Her hands were no longer on her chest. They were reaching outward, fingers curled in tension, as if grasping for something just beyond reach. And across her forearms, new marks. 12 perfect, symmetrical scratches. Fresh. He staggered back. The bedroom mirror had cracked straight down the center. Lightning split the sky. In the reflection, he saw not himself, but a little girl in a white nightdress, smiling with her mouth closed and her eyes black. He smashed the mirror with his cane. Later that night, he found the old family Bible Marjorie kept hidden beneath the floorboard. Between the pages was a letter addressed to the last Wexler. "They are not ghosts, they are repetitions. And they will return until the cycle is broken, or completed." In the margins she had scribbled one last note. "If they find each other again in the final hour, it will not be 2 girls who rise." The wind outside howled like a chorus, Rain lashed the windows, the piano notes stopped. And in the silence, Nathaniel heard the unmistakable sound of two young girls laughing, perfectly in unison. In 1934, the Ashwood estate was shuttered, left to rot under vines and silence. Nathaniel Clark had vanished 2 years prior, last seen boarding a train to Boston. Rumors claimed he went mad, muttering about mirrored souls and sibling convergence. His disappearance wasn't investigated. But in a locked room of St. Elora Psychiatric Hospital, far from the eyes of the town, the Wexler twins lived still. Annabeth and Eleanor had not aged equally. Though born the same hour, same day, Eleanor appeared far younger, skin smooth, hair dark, voice sharp. Annabeth, however, bore lines across her forehead, deep grooves at the corners of her mouth, as if time had turned harsher on her alone. When asked, the staff assumed misfiled birth dates. Their room, labelled Ward 9, was kept under strict supervision. One nurse fainted after hearing them speak in unison during sleep. Another was discharged after claiming the girls sometimes blinked at the same moment, even while facing opposite directions. Dr. Horace Linton was the only one who stayed. He'd read the file, the one marked Case 39B. He'd studied the photographs, the letters, the sketches, but none of it had prepared him for the reality of the Wexler twins. Their journals, kept meticulously under supervision, were identical, page for page. Drawings, symbols, memories, entire entries mirrored each other down to punctuation. On the day Eleanor suffered a nosebleed, Annabeth passed out. When Annabeth fractured her wrist during a fall, Eleanor screamed for hours, though untouched. Dr. Linton, a man grounded in logic, began to falter. "They are not mimicking," he wrote in his private notes. "They are replicating, reacting, resonating. Worse still, the dreams." Both girls described the same visions, waking in a dark corridor beneath a staircase, hearing whispers in reverse. A mirror cracked open, a woman without eyes, and always the ticking. At precisely 3:03 a.m., they would wake, together, every night. One morning, Eleanor awoke, humming, a soft, old melody none of the nurses recognized. Annabeth finished the song without hesitation. Later that week, the head nurse reported Eleanor speaking Latin in her sleep. That same day, Annabeth vomited black water. They were examined, blood drawn, questions asked, but no diagnosis held. And then came the photographs. Linton had installed a security camera in their room, a rare tool at the time, rigged with effort and expense. When he reviewed the film, his hands shook. The twins sat still. Then Eleanor rose, walked to the mirror, and vanished. No transition, no fade. One frame she was there, the next, gone. Annabeth collapsed at that exact moment, her body seizing. When the staff rushed in, Eleanor was seated calmly on her bed. Neither had moved. The mirror was cold to the touch. Cracked. After that incident, Dr. Linton requested a deeper search of the hospital's lower levels. Maintenance hesitated. Ward 9 was built over the ruins of an older structure. Rumors of tunnels, foundations left behind from a prior asylum, forgotten. Still, permission was granted. Behind a sealed door in the basement, they found a corridor lined in stone. At the end, a chamber, circular, familiar. On the floor, the same sigil, the same marble slab. The ritual room. "How did it get here?" Linton whispered. He documented everything, took photographs. None developed properly, only static, only blur. Back in Ward 9, the girls sat across from each other, unmoving. A nurse noted how their lips moved ever so slightly, not speaking, not breathing, but sinking, as if chanting something neither could hear aloud. That evening, Linton read their latest journal entries. Both had written the same sentence. "She's not outside the mirror. She's inside me." By autumn of 1935, the Wexler twins had become myth within the hospital walls. New nurses were warned, not with medical notes, but whispers. Don't enter Ward 9 alone. Don't let them speak together. Don't bring mirrors. Yet, rules began to break themselves. One morning, Eleanor vanished. There was no record of her discharge. No one had seen her leave. Cameras caught nothing but static between the hours of 2:55 and 3:04 a.m. When the footage resumed, only Annabeth remained, unconscious, slumped over her journal. A search swept the entire facility, no sign of forced entry, no open doors. The only thing out of place, a small puddle of water beneath the mirror. Dr. Linton ordered every inch of the sub-levels rechecked. They returned to the sealed corridor beneath the ward, this time equipped with tools, lanterns, and purpose. The team broke through the final barricade. The door behind it was made of iron. Carved into its center was the Wexler sigil, deep, exact, ancient. Beyond the door they found a perfect replica of the ritual room. Same circular slab, same soot-marked walls, same whispering chill. But this time there was something else. A symbol had been painted in blood on the far wall. Fresh, it pulsed faintly in the lamplight, as if alive. Above it, a single phrase, "Final hour begins." Dr. Linton approached the slab, trembling. The surface bore carvings that hadn't been there before, lines resembling veins or roots converging at a single point in the center. A mirror stood beside it. Not hung, but embedded into the stone like a window into another place. As he stared, the glass shimmered. A figure emerged. Eleanor, or something wearing her. Her eyes were not human. Her mouth did not move, yet her voice echoed in his mind. The separation is over. Linton stumbled backward, clutching his chest. Behind him, the other doctors fled. The mirror cracked down the center as she vanished again. Back in Ward 9, Annabeth awoke screaming. She had bled from the forehead, a straight line, matching the crack in the mirror. She whispered one word before fainting again. Together. The next day, the nurses reported strange behavior throughout the hospital. Clocks stopped. Patients repeated the same phrases, many in Latin, despite not sharing rooms or speaking the language. Lights flickered, doors opened without touch, and then the bleeding began. 4 patients, none in Ward 9, suffered identical lacerations on their backs, 12 scratches, always symmetrical, all at exactly 3:03 a.m. The hospital board threatened to shut the facility down. Doctor. Linton begged for more time. He returned to his office and reread the Wexler file. There, buried between torn pages, was a folded letter written in Marjorie's hand. The mirror was only the gate. The soul is the altar. If they return to one form, the hour will not pass. It will restart. He read it again and again. Then he wrote one final note in his own journal. I believe Eleanor is no longer a person. She is the convergence, and Annabeth is the vessel. If they reunite, the loop repeats, not for them, but for us, for all. That evening, he went back to the underground chamber alone. He brought no lantern, no recorder, only a vial of ash and the comb Marjorie had left behind. He never returned. The next morning, Annabeth was missing too. All that remained on her bed was a small drawing, 2 girls hand in hand beneath a cracked sky, and beneath it, scrawled in identical handwriting, "We remember now." Before Ashwood stood, before the town had a name, the land was forest and silence. In 1850 it was not yet cursed, it was chosen. Doctor. Alaric Wexler was a man of science, but also of obsession. Trained in medicine but fascinated by metaphysics, he arrived from Europe with volumes of arcane texts and a singular goal, to separate the soul, study it, and return it. He believed identity could be split and mirrored, that duality was not a flaw of human nature, but a door. He built a manor on land the local tribes warned him to leave untouched. They spoke of a river beneath the ground, one that whispered. He called it nonsense. He brought with him 2 infants, twins, born to a woman who died in childbirth. No one knew their names. He named them Clara and Mireille. The early records are sparse. Most were destroyed or hidden by later Wexlers. But what remains tells a grim tale. At age 6, the twins began to speak simultaneously, even when separated. They bled from mirrored wounds. They described dreams of places they'd never seen. A room of mirrors, a tree that bled light, a staircase that spun inwards. Alaric believed he was close. He constructed the first ritual room beneath his manor. There he etched the sigil, following diagrams found in an ancient text that bore no author's name. He placed the girls within the circle on the eve of their 7th birthday. The final entry in his journal read, "Tonight we make the division. The soul will stretch, not tear. They will become perfect reflections, 2 bodies, 1 root. They were never seen alive again." Servants claimed the manor shook that night. Windows shattered. All clocks stopped. When the storm passed, Alaric emerged, bloody and smiling. "It worked," he said, but he never explained what it was. Within a year, the girls' graves appeared behind the orchard. Simple stones, no dates, no names. And then the hauntings began. Children in the town spoke of seeing 2 girls in white, standing by the edge of the woods, hands clasped, eyes black. One local boy disappeared and was found 3 days later, barefoot, whispering a lullaby he had never learned. The town tried to burn the house. The fire consumed the east wing before vanishing mid-blaze. No embers, no smoke, just silence. Alaric died weeks later, found in the ritual room, arms outstretched, heart missing, chest uncut. The only mark on him, 12 symmetrical scratches down his back. The house passed to a distant cousin. Years passed, generations, and always the same pattern. Twin girls born into the line, dreams, bruises, mirrors, until Marjorie. She swore never to have children, but her sister did. And she gave birth to Annabeth and Eleanor. It was supposed to end there, but the cycle does not end. It waits, it sleeps, then it begins again. A priest named Barrow attempted to exorcise the house in 1873. He disappeared before completing the rite. His final letter sent to the Vatican read, "This is not possession, it is duplication. There are not 2 girls." There is one soul repeating itself across bodies, across years, and it wants to come home. The letter was never answered. The ritual room was sealed with iron and salt, forgotten, but the sigil remained. The wound could not be closed. In 1935, Annabeth and Eleanor vanished from the hospital, but their names were never removed from the registry. Each year since, on October 13th, the night sky above Ashwood flickers once. A brief, silent blink, like a mirror catching moonlight, and always at 3:03 a.m. In the autumn of 1960, the last remaining Wexler was found. Annabeth. She was discovered by hikers near the ruins of Ashwood, sitting quietly on a moss-covered bench that should not have survived the decades. Her dress was out of time, linen, high-necked, laced at the wrists. Her hair was long and grey, neatly braided. Her eyes stared at nothing. When the police brought her in, she spoke no words. Her fingerprints matched those taken from the St. Elora file, presumed dead in 1935. No signs of injury, no signs of aging beyond expectation, just silence. She was placed in a private wing of the new St. Elora facility, Ward 12. She never moved, never responded, never blinked out of sync. Days passed like drifting fog. Dr. Horace Linton, now near retirement, requested one last visit. He entered alone. She sat as he remembered, though older now, faded like a painting left in sun. He brought no notes, no tape recorder. Only the original Wexler file, now yellowed and cracking at the edges. "I don't expect you to answer," he began, "but I need to say it anyway." He opened the folder and laid it gently on the table between them. "You are part of something old, something you didn't choose." Her eyes remained still. "I've read everything, the journals, the letters, even Alaric's original writings. I understand now." Still no response. "But there's one thing I never found. Not once." His voice trembled. "What happened to Eleanor?" At that, something flickered behind her eyes. A blink. A breath. Barely more. He leaned forward. "I found the ritual room. I saw what you left. But I don't understand why the cycle broke." He reached into his coat pocket and removed a scrap of parchment, scorched, stained. It bore one phrase in Marjorie's handwriting. "Say the words, and she will open." He whispered them aloud. Annabeth turned her head for the first time in 25 years. "Horace," she said, voice like wind through brittle leaves. He froze. "She's here." He tried to speak, but the air thickened around him. "She's always been here," she continued, "but now she remembers her name." A low hum began, faint, rhythmic. Lights in the room flickered. Annabeth stood. She tried to separate, to be free, but you cannot divide a whole and expect peace. You just make echoes, shadows. Dr. Linton's knees weakened. "Where is she?" he asked. Annabeth smiled faintly. "She was me, I was her, but now we are neither." He backed toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The room grew darker. "You opened the mirror," she said. "Now we have to finish what he started." Linton's hand reached for his chest. A sharp pain. 12 symmetrical lines formed across his back, beneath the skin, unseen, but felt. He collapsed, gasping. Annabeth approached slowly, each step silent. "We aren't ghosts, Doctor," she whispered. "We're what comes before them." His vision blurred. Her face shifted. For a moment, he saw not one woman, but two. Then none. When the nurses found him an hour later, the room was empty. No Annabeth, no blood. Just a page torn from her old journal, pinned to the wall with a comb. The page read, same words. Same wounds, same final hour. And in the corner, scribbled like a signature, Eleanor. In October of 1960, just days after Dr. Horace Linton's mysterious death, a woman walked out of the woods bordering the ruins of Ashwood. She was barefoot, wearing a white nightgown, clean despite the mud. Her hair was long, dark, unbrushed. Her eyes were too young for her face. She introduced herself to the first passerby she met, a farmer hauling firewood near the tree line. "My name is Eleanor Wexler," she said calmly. "I've come home." The farmer recognized the name. Everyone in town did. He called the sheriff. She was brought into custody without resistance. When asked where she had been, she answered, "Here. Always here." Just deeper, they took her to St. Elora, where the staff stared in disbelief. She hadn't aged a day since her disappearance in 1935. She was medically healthy, no signs of trauma. But her vitals were strange. Her heartbeat was slow, too slow. Yet she remained alert, responsive, cooperative. One nurse described her as too still. Another swore the mirrors in her room fogged whenever she entered. Interviews with Eleanor yielded little. She remembered her childhood, the lake, Ashwood. She remembered Annabeth, my other half. She remembered the mirror. But when asked where she'd been, her answer never changed. Inside. Inside what? They asked. Inside the hour. A psychologist named Dr. Keating was brought in. He reviewed the Wexler files, including the accounts from Linton. Skeptical at first, he recorded every session meticulously. On the 5th interview, he asked a different question. "Do you remember the final ritual?" Eleanor's head tilted. "I remember the silence after." She stood and approached the mirror in the room. "She's close now," she whispered. "She's not trying to find me anymore. She's trying to be me." That night, Dr. Keating wrote in his journal, "She is not insane. She is in between. Her speech is measured. Her recall is clear. And yet, there is a shadow in her reflection that does not move when she does." The next day, local townspeople began reporting strange sightings. A woman in white, standing near the burnt remains of Ashwood, whispering names of girls long dead. A child who vanished near the orchard was found hours later, in the exact spot Eleanor had emerged, clutching a feather soaked in blood. He could not speak. When shown a photograph of Eleanor, he began to scream. The boy's mother burned the photo. Eleanor remained in the facility, but the staff grew uneasy. Lights dimmed in her presence, clocks skipped time. And always at 3:03 a.m. something shifted. One nurse described it as the room folding in on itself. Another quit after hearing a lullaby echoing through the vents. Eventually a priest was summoned, Father Dunn. He entered her room with a crucifix and left it without his voice. He never returned to the cloth. His final note, scribbled hastily in the margins of his Bible, read, "She is not possessed. She is the possession." In the town square, someone defaced the Wexler family memorial with the words, "She returns. She always returns." But Eleanor never fled. She waited. Each morning she would stare at the mirror, humming a melody none could identify, but all felt familiar. And sometimes, as visitors passed by, they swore she wasn't alone in the reflection, that another girl stood beside her, identical but older, watching, waiting. One evening, Eleanor finally spoke as a storm approached. "She's almost here," the nurse asked. "Who?" Eleanor blinked once. "Me." On the night of October 13th, 1960, time broke. It began subtly. A wall clock stopped in the St. Elora dining hall at exactly 3:03 a.m. No one noticed. Then came the nurse's watch, then the hallway lights. By morning, nearly every timepiece in the hospital had frozen. Eleanor sat upright in her bed at dawn, eyes wide open, whispering the word again over and over. At first, the staff thought it a relapse. Then the patients began to scream, unprovoked. Unseen triggers. Some shouted Latin, others clawed at their chests, drawing symmetrical marks with their nails. A boy in Ward 3, non-verbal for years, began repeating one phrase: "The hour cracks, the mirror bleeds." Doctors rushed to stabilize the facility. Emergency meetings were called, but every attempt to contact outside help failed. Phones buzzed with static. Radios reversed their signal. And in the eastern hallway, the security camera caught a flicker. A woman in white passing between frames, never touching the floor. Eleanor refused to eat, refused to speak. She simply stared into the mirror in her room and tapped her fingers in a rhythm. 3. Pause. 3. Pause. Dr. Keating entered her room, desperate. "What's happening?" he asked. Eleanor's head tilted slowly. "You opened the door, now we walk through." "Who's we?" She blinked, and for a moment he saw two reflections in the glass. "Annabeth," she whispered. "She remembers now." That evening, the air in the hospital thickened, humid, charged, waiting. Patients collapsed mid-step. Lights dimmed. The power grid surged and failed. In darkness, the clocks chimed once. 3:03 a.m., doctor. Keating found himself alone in the observation room, his notes scattered, his hands trembling. And there, scribbled on the wall in his own handwriting, though he had no memory of writing it, they relived the death because they never finished dying. In Ward 12, Eleanor stood before the mirror, arms outstretched. The glass rippled. Cracks spread from the center outward, slowly then suddenly until the surface fractured like ice. The moment shattered. Keating blinked, and the hospital was gone. He stood in a corridor made of stone, cold, familiar. The ritual room. He heard humming, then footsteps, then two voices, saying the same sentence. Same hour, same ending, same pain. Eleanor stepped from the shadows. So did Annabeth. They were identical now, no longer divided by age or form. One stepped forward, the other mirrored. Keating stumbled backward. "You're not real," he whispered. Annabeth's voice answered, "We were too real." Eleanor added, "That was the mistake." Keating tried to run, but the room tilted. The symbols beneath his feet lit red. He looked down. Blood pooled along the cracks in the stone. Not from a wound, but from time itself. He fell to his knees. Around him echoes of laughter, screaming, clocks chiming out of sequence. He cried out, but no one heard. Only the twins. They stood above him. Then they spoke in perfect unison. "You opened the hourglass. Now drown in the sand." And the world inverted. For exactly 1 minute, every clock within a 3-mile radius ticked backward. The sky over the ruins of Ashwood blinked like an eyelid. Trees bent toward the earth, then snapped back. And inside St. Elora, patients wept in silence, trapped between breaths. When time resumed, Eleanor was gone. And so was Dr. Keating. The mirror in her room remained, shattered. But on its surface, a single phrase had been written in condensation, fading even as it was read. "We are not finished." The room was empty now. St. Elora sealed Ward 12 the morning after Eleanor vanished. No explanation, no recovery, only silence. But those who worked the night shift spoke in low tones of what they'd seen, reflections moving without their hosts, shadows splitting from bodies, whispers in the vents that knew their names. Some quit, some prayed, none stayed long, and still, at exactly 3:03 a.m., the lights flickered. The air pulsed, the clocks trembled. Back in the ruins of Ashwood, where the trees bent toward the earth and the grass refused to grow, something stirred beneath the soil. The ritual room was awakening. A tremor split the ground above it, thin, precise, like a crack in porcelain. Inside, two figures stood opposite each other. Annabeth, Eleanor, no longer children, no longer patients, no longer entirely human. They did not speak aloud. Words were unnecessary. Annabeth raised her hand. Eleanor mirrored it. A second passed, then a breath, and the sigil beneath them glowed red once more. The circle began to spin, slowly, then faster, etched lines pulsing with an ancient rhythm neither remembered learning, but both had known since birth. The mirror embedded in the wall pulsed. It showed neither twin. Instead, it reflected the hour. Not time on a clock, but the final moment, 3:03 a.m., always 3:03. It had become a place, not a measurement, and they stood inside it. Annabeth stepped forward. "I wanted to forget," she said. Her voice was her own, yet filled with echoes. "I wanted to be only me," Eleanor replied, "but we were never made for separation." Their eyes locked. "We were made for convergence." At once the chamber grew darker. The light bent inward. The mirror cracked again, 3 sharp fractures that formed a triangle. From within, voices spilled. The children lost, the women bound, the twins reborn. Annabeth wept. Eleanor bled. The wounds were the same. They always had been. The moment neared. The final minute. Together they stepped into the sigil's center. Their hands touched, their foreheads met. Then they spoke. Same words, same wounds, same final hour. The light shattered. The ground screamed. Time reversed, then halted. For a fraction of infinity, the world forgot itself. And in the dark something breathed. Not a ghost, not a demon. A memory that had grown teeth. The ritual room exploded outward. No fire, no wind, just absence. The chamber was gone, the mirror gone, the sigil erased, and so were the twins. Nothing remained, except one final sound. 2 girls laughing, perfectly in sync, then quiet, unbearable, eternal quiet. Morning came quietly over the hills of New Hampshire. Ashwood was gone. Where the manor once stood, there remained only a blackened field, charred, empty, silent. No signs of fire, no foundation, no ash, just scorched grass, shaped in a perfect circle, untouched by wind or weather. Locals whispered again, of strange lights the night before, of the sky flashing once, then returning to stillness, of every clock in town stopping at the same time, 3:03 a.m. An investigation was launched, but there was nothing to find, no remains, no rubble, no explanation, only a stone. At the center of the clearing, smooth, dark, carved with a phrase no one dared to claim. Same words, same wounds, same final hour. Over the following weeks the town fell into an uneasy quiet. The birds returned, but they no longer sang near the Ashwood grounds. Children avoided the woods. The air tasted faintly of iron. A construction team sent to survey the land reported tools disappearing, compasses spinning, and cameras capturing only static. They never came back. At St. Elora, Ward 12 was bricked over. No one remembered ordering it. The mirror once held there had vanished. The nurses no longer spoke of Eleanor Wexler. Her file was sealed, archived, then lost. The last entry in her chart, written in faded ink, read, "She spoke to herself in unison." One final detail surfaced years later. A maintenance worker clearing brush from the edge of the Ashwood ruins found a small leather-bound journal, intact despite the elements. The pages were empty except for the final one. There, in identical handwriting, was a drawing. 2 girls side by side, each with one eye darkened. Below it, "We are whole now." They were never seen again. But sometimes, when the moon is low and the clocks run late, strangers report hearing laughter echo through the trees near the orchard, high, soft, overlapping like twins, and in dreams a mirror cracks. And a voice says again. If you felt the cold creep of the Wexler legacy tonight, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We dive deep into hidden horrors, untold tragedies, and the forgotten echoes of time. Every week, a new, true nightmare. Tap the video on your screen now to uncover another tale buried in silence before time runs out again.